Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Fist-Dented Christians. Dustin and DJ are here, and we've been having a conversation the last half hour, 45 minutes, just catching up with each other. We haven't seen each other in a couple weeks, and talking about all the crazy things that are happening in this world. And we were texting earlier in the week, and we were talking about like what we wanted to talk about on the podcast specifically, and I brought up forgiveness. Um, and I think forgiveness is a thing that gets overlooked a lot in terms of moving forward for both yourself and society. And so I thought it'd be good to have that discussion today about forgiving ourselves for things we do to ourselves and forgiving others for things they do to us, and then even on a grander scale, different members or groups of societies forgiving other groups of societies and trying to move on. Um, so I know, like, my own self, forgiveness for myself is really hard, and I think that's part of the reason that I get hung up in all the bad habits that I have, because I don't forgive myself, so then I beat myself up, and it makes me feel worse, and then I do stupid things like overeat or go to a prostitute, and then, it's a vicious circle, and it just feeds on itself. Um, but I think that expands out to society as well, and that's not to say, in my personal life I can't just forget all the stupid things I've done and move on, because then I'm not learning any lessons. So it's this balance act that you're trying to find of forgiveness but not forgetting, moving on but not blindly so that you make the same mistakes again. So I think that's forgiveness can be very, very difficult on an emotional level, because you don't want to, like, you're emotionally wounded, so you feel like forgiving is a sign of weakness. But I think forgiving can be hard from a logical standpoint too, because it's a balancing act, and that balancing act is very hard to do sometimes.
I uh, I agree, and you said a couple things that kind of made me perk up a little bit about. Before I get into that, though, excuse me. Um, let's define what forgiveness is.
Okay.
I mean, we're each going to have maybe a different
Yeah.
take, but
Yep.
what is forgiveness?
I would say, for me, forgiveness means recognizing the imperfectness in people and not holding it against them at the core of who they are, and allowing the possibility for growth to happen and change to happen.
So, grace in motion.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what I hear, right?
Yep. Yep.
So forgiveness is grace and mercy in action,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's a conscious choice that we have to make daily.
Yeah.
And
At least daily.
yeah, maybe
Sometimes hourly.
hourly, right? Yeah, every minute.
Yep.
Towards ourselves,
Yes.
towards other people, in relationship,
Yep.
and then towards the world,
Yep.
right? Um, Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
Yep.
Is kind of the ultimate utterance
Yep.
of forgiveness.
Yep.
And it just hits exactly what you said in terms of forgiveness is recognizing the sinfulness of others,
Yep.
because we all fall short of the glory of God.
Yep.
And so God on the cross, in one of his probably the most um, horrific, sort of painful, torturous, traumatic situations, he forgave, like,
Yeah.
in that moment.
Yeah.
And how often do we do that when we're in horrific, terrible, when somebody wrongs us to such a degree? I mean, never will any of us be crucified and flogged and spit on and cursed and thrown rocks at,
Yeah.
and then have died this horrible, horrible death. But we go through our daily maladies, and we go through our daily frustrations, when in comparison to what Christ went through, seem just stupid.
Yeah.
And yet we struggle with forgiveness.
Yeah.
And that just blows my mind. And so if grace is, or if forgiveness is grace and mercy in action, you know, that goes out into the world. And I like what you said. I think we weren't recording yet, but you said, you know, whoever listens to this, it's important to have a topic on forgiveness, because with all that's going on in the world right now, this is exactly what we need.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
The idea that the George Floyd's family would forgive the officer that killed their son. Man.
Yeah.
Somebody did that to one of my kids. I don't know if forgiveness is ever going to be a part of that.
Right.
Or if somebody cheats on you, or if you get fired from your job, you know, it's hard. And so I'm agreeing with you. Forgiveness can be really, really difficult, because for so many reasons. And so what I was going to say with one of the things you said is it's difficult to forgive, because that it's difficult to forgive fully and not carry something about that along with you.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So you can say, yeah, you know, you broke up with me, or you didn't do something that I expected. I forgive you, but I'm not going to forget it. You know?
Right.
I forgive you, and so there's still a little bit of resentment. So
yeah.
I feel like, what does pure forgiveness look like, and do we even have the capacity to do that?
Right.
Because you can forgive me if I'm a dick to you.
Right.
But like, you're gonna kind of remember like that one day that DJ was a fucking dick.
Right.
Like, he told me I was fucking fat, and that, you know, like, or, you know, your nose is big, DJ, and you freaking need to stop being so needy all the time.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'd be curious, and you could speak to this, like, how do parents forgive their children? Because that seems like the one situation where it is easier or possible for humans to attain or achieve, like, quote unquote, perfect forgiveness. And so I'd be curious to, like, talk with my parents about stupid shit I did to them and all the mental anguish I put them through, and they still forgive and move on. And
yeah, you know, that's a really good question, because, and I'm automatically thinking of Katie.
Right.
So Katie screwed up. You know, she's a good kid by and large.
Yep.
But she screwed up. And my biggest thing is I don't like to be lied to.
Sure.
And so I've caught her in a couple lies, you know, and obviously she's a kid.
Yeah.
And a teenage kid, so some of the lies are kind of a little bit more impactful.
Yeah.
It impacts me, and I kind of honestly can say I love her no matter what.
Right.
I forgive her.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna be a little bit more sensitive to when she tells me something in the future, right? Not hold it against her.
Right.
But, like, okay, we have a little bit of a track record of dishonesty,
Yep.
and I can understand why you were dishonest.
Yep.
But when there comes another situation that's difficult and you don't feel like your first impulse is to be honest,
Yep.
you know, then I'm gonna be a little sensitive to that,
Yep.
right? But again, it's unconditional love. I love my kid.
Right.
Like, she's my kid.
Right.
I forgive her if she screws up.
Yeah. But what I would say is, like, because you brought up, and I agree with you, that, like, if a friend says something that hurts you, you can forgive them, but there might be, or there likely is, some resentment. Katie lies, and just as a parent, you have to have your antenna up because you're teaching her how to be an adult, but there's no, like, built-in resentment.
Right.
So that's I think where it's different. And how do you develop that level of forgiveness for non-children,
Mm-hmm.
for people that aren't your children? I think, yeah, so I think having parents talk about forgiveness without resentment would be a interesting thing to get into with psychologists and regular people, because there's, I think of, I mean, by and large I was a good kid. I didn't do a lot of things wrong, but I I know I still did stupid things and made my parents disappointed in me or whatever, but I don't think, and even if they were angry in the moment, I don't think once that initial wave of emotion gets over with, because we're all human and sometimes you just can't control that emotion right away. I don't think that they resent me at all. I think they completely forgive me. Um, I was on Facebook and my one of my old bosses, a guy named Bruce, was mentioning that was remembering the day his mother died. She died in the last, well, she died in 2018, but the anniversary of her death was in the last week or so. And I wish I could remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of, I think of all the things she gave me and how much I'd like to repay her, but I know that she'd just write it down as paid in full. And like that level of love, like no matter what you do as a kid, your parents, most of the time, have no resentment. And how do we get there?
Well, I think how we get there is because there's this corollary that I think is really kind of good right now is the father mother love for their children, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the same love that God has for us.
Yes.
And so if we're fall short of of that, but we're given that grace and mercy from above, we're forgiven for our sins, then maybe one of the only ways to really try to aspire to that is to kind of live and follow the word of God.
Yeah.
And because it's almost like in a way it's as though like, hey, I've been given this gift freely
Yeah.
and unconditionally, this pure love and forgiveness from above. And if you equate that to like a toy as a kid,
Yeah.
like I've been given this for nothing.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I want to share it with you. I want you to play with it
Sure.
with me.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's an external thing that we're just given by God that comes to us, and as a result of that tether, right, that knowing that it comes to us from God, then we embody that, and then we give it to others, knowing and acknowledging the fact that we're not perfect, but as long as we kind of have that clear freaking highway to God's love,
Yeah.
hopefully it'll be a conduit for us to show it to other people.
Yeah.
You know, and again, that's a very spiritual kind of suggestion. It's not necessarily psychological,
Right.
but I guess it could be. You know,
Yeah.
it's a higher power,
Right.
right? Um,
I think it's interesting. I was kind of thinking about this as you were speaking about like being tethered with God. And then you were talking about Jesus on the cross, and then what I had said about how do I define forgiveness. And I think it's probably easiest for parents to forgive their children because they know their children so well. So the better you know somebody, the easier it is to forgive because you know their heart. And it's really hard to forgive if you don't know their heart and their motives and everything they've been through. And so I think a way to, for lack of a better term, get around that if you can't know a person individually is to know God and his forgiveness.
mm-hmm.
So if somebody wrongs me and I don't know them, it's hard for me to forgive them because I don't know them, and then the natural human inclination is to attach the worst motives to a person's actions. But if I recognize my relationship with the Father and recognize that his relationship is the same with that person as it is with mine, then it's easier for me to look at that person and go, okay, what has gone on in their life that they have messed up, or that they've been messed up so much that they just did this action that's horribly damaging. And so I think maybe a lot of forgiveness is building in a a worldview that everybody is family, and that sounds really like new agey and hippie and
it's kind of true though.
right.
You made me think of a perfect example of it's easier to forgive when we know somebody. So, here's an example: road rage.
Yep.
Okay. So we're driving down the street. Somebody pulls out in front of us. They didn't use their turn signal. Like they almost get you in a car accident.
Yep.
And you're just pissed.
Yep.
And then you find out it's your best friend.
Right.
Okay, if we didn't know them,
right,
it's easier to be mad at them.
Oh yeah.
But then we find out, oh, like that's John. Like,
yep.
Hey John, what the hell you doing, man? Like,
right.
but then it's.
Yep. Then it's over.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you bring up the road rage, because I have a buddy of mine that got into a really bad car accident probably like 6 years ago or something, 7 years ago. He was driving in winter and he hit some black ice, and he was driving under the speed limit. He was on 694, so the speed limit's 60. He said he was doing about 50, and he hit some black ice and he rolled his truck a few times. So, and luckily he was fine. The truck was, like, the insurance company totaled it, but he walked away without, like maybe a bruise on his hip or something. Like, just miraculously nothing major happened. But he now admits that, especially in the winter, he drives slower because he's afraid of that happening again. And so I think about that because I get road rage really bad. And I think I try and picture, like, what if that was Greg?
Or your mom.
Yeah, like I wouldn't want somebody to be as mad at Greg as I am at that person right now, because they don't know that Greg rolled his truck and has this traumatic thing that weighs on his mind. So cut them some slack. Now, unfortunately, it works less than it should because I still get road rage, but I try really hard to always remember that, because I wouldn't want somebody to be mad at Greg. They don't know that Greg went through a truck rolling incident. That's a traumatic thing. So I don't know what that person went through. I don't, maybe they're on, even though they shouldn't be on their phone, what if they're on their phone because they've just found out their parent is dying and they're like trying to get medical information and they're rushing to the hospital? Who knows? And then some people will say, well, you can't let people walk all over you and all that. And yeah, I get that. Like, society needs to function and all that. But I think the first thing in your mind should be forgiveness. Give people the benefit of the doubt.
Well, you can even make no excuses. Maybe they're just assholes.
Sure.
And they're just, by and large, they're just people that just want to irritate everybody else.
Right.
But they still, when you forgive, okay, because you have two choices, and we're talking about road rage, which I think goes perfectly into cultural rage.
Sure.
And how hard it is to overcome road rage when you don't know them, versus how hard it is to overcome cultural rage when you don't know the culture.
You're right.
Sorry. Forgot my train of thought too now. But I guess the thing is that it's easier to. Man, what was I going to say? Oh, you have two choices. So it's either you're going to be you're going to be angry because it's road rage. You don't know them.
Yeah.
That anger isn't good for you.
Right.
That anger is actually. The anger sometimes. I think sometimes anger is justified.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
But in little situations that come through us throughout our day, when our expectations aren't being met, or something didn't happen the way that we wanted it to, or we're just feeling sorry for ourselves like I am today, that anger, that one choice, which is to be angry and feeling sorry for yourself, that only hurts me. It has nothing to do with God.
Right.
Whereas forgiveness, that's another choice. Forgiveness is grace and mercy in action.
Yeah.
And so when I choose grace and mercy in action, it's a little bit harder to get there. It maybe isn't my first initial impulse, but in the long run, it's going to be better for me. Physically, mentally, spiritually, because I'm sorry, but when we're angry, that's the devil's playground. Like, let's go, right? Let's divide and conquer. Let's destroy. Grace and mercy in action are things are things where God actually has space to move in you, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I think that you hear a lot. Obviously, you and I being Christians, we're gonna side with God and forgiveness and love and all that stuff. But I think um, there's been plenty of studies that just like secular studies that forgiveness is better. There is something about like long-term anger that just destroys you. It just eats away at you and it creates bitterness and resentment that you hold on to, and it makes your life more difficult.
It makes others' lives more difficult that are around you.
Yeah. So I think it's so funny to me because whether you believe in God or not, or so by extension whether you read the Bible or believe it to be true, there are a lot of things biblically that apply to the real world that you don't find if you don't want to believe in a divine creator. But there's enough wisdom in there that it's worth reading and taking seriously. And forgiveness is literally at the top of that. I mean, that's the whole point of Jesus was
Right.
forgiveness of sins. And by extension, or zooming out from that, love. And you can't have love and anger at the same time. I mean, you can have,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah, you can have love in a big picture, like a child. You can
Right,
be mad
right,
at the child
right.
in the moment,
Right.
but ultimately the bigger thing is
Right.
love.
Right.
And you can't, yeah, you can't let that anger like take root. You can have it, you can deal with it, you can move on, but you got to work on assuming or trying to assume the best of people and giving them the most latitude to grow. If you only give them 3 degrees either way to grow, it's going to be very hard. But if you give them 20 degrees either way, it's easier for them to maneuver around and figure out, oh, okay, I went too far this way and I went too far that way, and eventually they'll get on the right path. But the narrower you make it, the more difficult it is for them to figure it out, and the more frustrated they get, and then they don't even necessarily want to grow. They're just like, screw it. If it's going to be this hard, if you're going to be this mean to me, then I'm just going to be that mean to you.
God, I really like the visual of that. That anger is more of a it's a more of a straight line, very thin line
Yeah.
that doesn't allow for any error
Yeah.
in terms of the other person.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Whereas grace and forgiveness and mercy are more kind of open armed.
Yep.
Like, okay, you screwed up.
Yep.
I'm a little upset, but you know what? You screwed up.
Yeah.
I told. And another thing about forgiveness too is you talked about the internal forgiveness, is to recognize the idea that there is nothing that another person can do short of murder
Yeah.
that I probably can't understand.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I get when you're so angry that you want to destroy something.
Sure.
You know, if that's burning down a building, you know, or if it's just punching a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
I've done that. You know, I haven't burned down a building, but you know, I get anger, and so
Yeah.
I think another part of forgiveness is empathy.
Yeah.
Is just being able to understand why somebody did what they did, and it wasn't like you said earlier. It's not anything that you take personally,
Right.
but you can at least understand, like, okay, something's going on with you that made you do that. It's nothing against me, or maybe it was against me. Maybe it was.
Sure.
And then what do you do when you forgive somebody but they still keep wronging you? You know what I mean?
Right.
They still keep hurting you or choosing to kind of treat you a certain way,
Yep.
or you know, that's when forgiveness becomes really hard. It's
Yep.
like, okay, well, like, I forgive you the first time, but you, and that goes back to your point of like, well, they're walking all over you. Well, that's kind of your choice, though. I think,
Right.
right? You can forgive them, And if you allow them to keep doing it and you don't like it,
Right.
then you got to do something about it.
Right. And I think people have a hard time with the concept of just walking away from something. Like, you can forgive somebody and not allow them to walk all over you,
Right.
and not hate them, and just be done with them in your life. Because not everybody can help everybody else. Like, the a woman in an abusive relationship, I wouldn't.
Right.
She shouldn't stay with the
Continually
guy.
forgive her husband for beating her
Yeah,
up.
she can forgive him, but that doesn't mean she needs to stay with
Right.
him. And you can just walk away and go, okay, I will work on forgiveness, but I can't continue to be beaten up all the time. Like, that's not, like, I have my own intrinsic value, and you're violating that. So we're just going to be done. And I think that happens with a lot of people. Like, just, you don't have to hate them, you can just be done with them. You can, I mean, you're gonna, if you're abused, you're gonna hate, and that's fine. I'm not saying to not go through that process, and if you hate somebody, that you're a horrible person yourself. You're a human, you're flawed, you're imperfect, you got to work through it. But the ultimate goal should be, if they're not going to change, you can be done having them in your life, but you can also forgive them.
Right.
And getting rid of that toxic hatred and resentment.
And do you think that societies or races can hold as a macrocosm toxicity and hatred?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's what we see going on in our world right now.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I think the media and social media is kind of perpetuating it.
Yeah.
But I do, I mean, I've seen examples of, like, I told you earlier when we were having our breakfast,
Yeah.
like trying to look African American people in the eye at Cub or at the grocery store. They just want nothing to do with me.
Right.
You know, and again, I could be reading more into it, but
Right.
I make an effort. I'm not going over there and offering to buy their groceries, but I'm making an effort to be friendly.
Right.
And I just feel like there's this tone right now in the world where there isn't a lot of forgiveness right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think both sides seem to be getting more entrenched in wanting to be right. Like I was saying earlier when we were having breakfast, it's just a point system, and everybody's just trying to be the most virtuous, not as an example to set to how to help people. It's just so that they can point to everybody else that they're more quote unquote virtuous then, and go, see, you're just a piece of shit, look how awesome I am.
Mm-hmm.
Until somebody else comes along that is more virtuous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, you're a piece of shit now, and it's not doing anything.
It's not helping you either.
No, if you're constantly worried about point scoring, you're never going to move forward on anything.
Well, and you're right, and it's one of the one of the things that it's funny you say that. I went to the gym on Monday early, first thing in the morning, so all the elderly people were there.
Yep.
And I hop in the pool, and I'm like just kicking butt, right?
Sure.
All the older people are just kind of slowly, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm a great swimmer. I'm
Yep.
so in shape, right? And then this one guy gets in the pool, and he just starts kicking my ass, right?
Sure.
And it made me think, like, that's a slippery slope to kind of always do the comparing,
Yep.
because there's always going to be somebody that's smarter,
Yep.
somebody that's going to work harder,
Yep.
somebody's going to have more money, somebody that's going to be more spiritually advanced.
Yep.
So you can't base, and so when you take that in terms of culturally,
Yep.
you can't do that
Right.
because it doesn't help. Number
Right.
one, the only thing it could maybe do is give you a little bit of context of where your shortcomings are.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
And I think that's what, as a white guy, I think that's what the white culture needs to do.
Yep.
Is not necessarily be who's got more points,
Yeah.
but where are we in the context of what we've done wrong and how
Yep.
can we get better?
Yep.
Same with African American community,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah, I can't remember if I was saying it on the podcast or right before, but each side moving in a little bit,
Yeah.
and then reassessing,
Yeah.
and then move in a little bit
You
more.
did say it on the podcast.
Okay, and I don't think either side is willing to do that in the context of the white community and the black community trying to figure this out. The black community there's a lot of people in the black community that just want to hold on to all the things that have been done wrong, and then the white community wants to hold on to the fact that, well, this is America and you can just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's like, well, no, it's not the case. So each side has to move in a little bit and forgive a little bit and try and see it from the other side's perspective, and then reassess and, oh, okay, yeah, look at some things are getting better, and I can see now some more deficiencies, and the black community can say, oh, I can see that things have gotten better, even though there's still a long way to go. And you just like build up momentum each way till you get to a common ground that works.
And you got to do that with forgiveness.
Right.
You can't do that with anger.
No. It's literally impossible, because the anger will just, the second something doesn't work, the anger will just point that out, and it'll fixate on what's not working. It'll never fixate on what's working.
Right. Anger and forgiveness cannot exist in the same space at the same time.
Right.
You can be angry,
Yep.
but then you can forgive.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And you can't forgive and then be angry.
Right.
And that's not really forgiveness.
Right.
Right?
Yep. Yeah.
Right on.
Yep. All right, folks. Well, I think that's a good stopping point. Hopefully you guys can work on forgiveness in your own life. And certainly DJ and I will be doing that and talking about it more in our own lives. So we both hope you have a blessed day whenever you're listening to this, and go out into the world and forgive.